Hello, 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 Reza. How are you today?
I'm good, Shay. How you doing?
I am doing well. It's nice. It's been a hot but nice day, and we're back with Future Forward.
Yeah. So this one is near and dear to my heart. This episode, we're going to talk about the future of architecture and sustainable design. I'm just passionate about a few topics. It seems like they keep growing every time we get into an episode that we want to talk about. I'm like, man, I really like this topic too. So I'm I'm again excited about this one today. I feel like I say that almost in every episode, but that's a good thing.
It is. It is a good thing, Reza. And before we dive in, welcome to our new listeners. This is Future Forward, and for our old listeners, thanks for coming back. And Future Forward is a conversation Reza and I have been having for years now. And it centers around cities, the past and the history of cities, how we got to where we are, how we got to today, and strategic foresight about the future, borrowing from the past towards building sustainable cities and thriving communities. And we take interesting, important topics about cities. And today's topic is one that is near and dear to Reza's heart, mine as well. Some of the coolest people I know are architects, honestly. And so I'm excited for us to dive into it today.
Yeah. And so before we do, I just want to dedicate to this episode to my dad, who studied architectural engineering and from whom I inherited my love of architecture. He passed away a couple years ago. His favorite architect was Frank Lloyd Wright. I grew up, him talking about Frank Lloyd Wright and looking at his books all over our house and his office. He practiced as an engineer and a construction manager for a few years before buying a contracting business. And that's why I love construction, because he was in construction. He put up one of the most iconic modern buildings in Mumbai. It's called Petroleum House. For those of you watching on YouTube, I have a little postcard that shows Petroleum House. So we drove by it every morning on our way to school, and he would regale us with stories of its design and construction. It is one of those buildings very early on that actually had green building features with the louvers all along the building, which reduced the air conditioning needs by 20 to 25%. So part of the design was not about checking the box on doing green building, but actually making it better for the office workers in it. And so it leads to why we talking about this topic. How do spaces we live in define the lives that we lead? So architecture is not just about structures, but it's also about the social and environmental systems that influence them. The episode was inspired by a book I read this weekend, Welcome to Your World: How the Built Environment Shapes Our Lives, by Sarah Williams Goldhagen. Going to try to get her to be a special guest for us. In it, she argues that buildings and spaces are intertwined with our daily experiences, profoundly shaping our mental and social well-being. A big thanks to my product manager friend Jack, who recommended it. This book really resonated with it. It sort of brought an approach to architecture that is something that we've been trying to talk about in Future Forward, about how you sort of bring the community or the people that are, the humans at the center of all the decisions that we make about cities.
Mhm.
So that's what's this, I'm going to try to center the episode on those aspects of architecture and sustainable design.
That's great, Reza. Yeah, let's just dive right in. Let's do it as we typically do, where we start from the past. So
Yeah.
bring us the history of architecture.
Yeah. So, really architecture started as shelter, a basic human need. We needed shelter for protection from the elements. Early structures, mud huts, caves, they date back to prehistoric times. They were primitive dwellings, they were functional, just focused on survival. As societies grew more complex, architecture evolved into an expression of cultural identity, power, spirituality. Ancient Egyptians built monumental structures like the pyramids as tombs for the pharaohs, symbolizing their divine status. Greek and Roman architecture followed. They emphasized symmetry, balance, civic pride with the Parthenon, the Colosseum. They stand as iconic examples that we all know. So they weren't just buildings. They were statements of philosophical ideals, whether it was democracy, order, or humanism. And it was, architecture really became a formal profession during the Renaissance, the 15th and the 16th centuries. During this period, architects were actually recognized as distinct professionals who not only designed the structures, but also, supervised the construction. So Filippo Brunelleschi, who engineered the dome of the Florence Cathedral, very famous, iconic building. Leonardo da Vinci. They were all early examples of architects that were blending art, engineering, scientific principles to create these buildings. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution really transformed architecture. We got materials like steel and concrete to build taller buildings, faster construction. That was the start of skyscrapers and urbanization on a mass scale. That's, when cities truly, became what they are modern today. In 1857, the American Institute of Architects was founded, and that was the turning point where architecture became a regulated profession, especially in the US. It required formal education, it required credentials. It set the stage for architecture as we know it today, with architects, they take on these formal roles in shaping cities and buildings with the public welfare in mind. But today, this is one thing that we'll explore when we start talking about the current state. If we look at architecture today, it faces a couple challenges. One is addressing this global urbanization while adapting to the urgent need of sustainability. More and more people are moving into cities, and we continue to face greater and greater challenges with making them sustainable. And we have laws that we talk about. You'll probably pull on that thread when I get through this section. So despite the profound impact that buildings have on the environment and society, architecture is still often sidelined by developers and constrained by cost-cutting measures. So many projects prioritize efficiency, profitability over thoughtful design. And so buildings are uninspiring and disconnected from the needs of people and our planet. It's also a profession that's really under pressure to evolve. Architects are increasingly called upon to not only design, but to solve complex problems that our society faces: climate change, social equity, community well-being. Cities grow. Architects are trying to play this critical role in designing a more sustainable, resilient, livable urban environment, but it's really difficult to do when you're not, looked at as the first, people to help with that, because that's not often prioritized. So it's grown from, this basic shelter to an influential profession that shapes our cities and experiences, but its full potential is often underutilized, making it more critical to refocus on human-centered sustainable design. And, I'll end this with, what my dad would often tell us. I was like, Dad, why didn't you continue being an architect or, staying in the profession? He was like, well, it's an incredibly difficult profession unless you have some rich patrons that are willing to do buildings with you and do the design in the way you want. It can become a very frustrating profession. And so that's why he went and bought his own contracting business. I have a very dear friend of mine, Jeremy, who's an architect, and I see him, every couple months. We go and get dinner. I love talking to him about architecture, and I hear the challenges that he faces as a practicing architect and trying to bring those principles into the construction that we do, and the difficulty that he has doing it. So let me pause over here, Seyi, and see if there are any threads that you can pull before we get to the next section.
Oh man, thanks so much for bringing us from the past and sort of highlighting the cultural importance of architecture is maybe the thread that I take from that. They're similar to the conversation we had about art in cities.
Yeah.
There is a deep connection between the design of buildings in cities and the identity of that city. No one who's been to Barcelona who will not sort of talk about the design of the Sagrada Familia. It is as much of the place as any of the other important cultural touch points that you think about. So architecture, amazingly important, but it has receded to the background in terms of its importance, which is kind of crazy. And as you were saying that, the second thread that occurred for me, I wasn't joking when I said some of the coolest people I know are architects. When I used to live in London, Sundays we would go listen to music or visit the city, and it was a group of us, about 4 or 5 of us. 2 of them were architects, Dolapo and Rotimi, and they were literally the coolest people I knew because they could walk the city. We'd take the train, we'd be going to, say, the Jazz Cafe or something, but we'd pass a building and they had so much understanding of what had gone into these iconic buildings in London. And consequently, my experiences of London were enriched by the fact that I engaged consistently with these two architects who were amazingly fashionable, just super smart architects who are both no longer in architecture, unfortunately. Yeah.
So how come did they decided that that wasn't something that they wanted to pursue?
It was too tough. They both
Yeah.
went into design related fields.
Mm,
Dolapo has been running this amazing fashion design line
yeah.
for years now, and it's pretty epic. And so shout out to her. Super cool architect, designer, now fully a designer. And Rotimi is running his family's business, which is not in architecture. So
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of a shame, but it does reflect where things stand with architecture. So with that in mind, what's going on today? Yeah.
Yeah. So so let's so Sarah Williams brings up these data points that I think are really useful to think about. So the percentage of construction projects that involve an architect or design team, it varies, but it's typically 2 to 10% of global construction projects that actually involve formal architectural or design input. It's tiny.
That is tiny.
Yeah. So you see more of it in residential construction, say if there's a richer person that wants to
Yeah. A
use
patron, essentially.
patron essentially. And then if you have a larger, more complex institutional or commercial project, you have to have an architect to get it certified and things like that. So there are regulatory demands on it, but they're just there to sort of stamp stuff, not
Yeah.
actually to be as involved in the design.
Mm,
Clients don't often want to spend on architecture, so it makes it challenging to get those design needs in it.
mm,
So Sarah Williams Goldhagen, she brings out some other key points that I think are really important in her argument that architecture must shift from this narrow focus on aesthetics or
mm,
cost efficiency to sort of broader human-centered and sustainable approach that
mm.
social connection that we often talk about and environmental responsibility or sustainability.
Yeah.
And so she talks about like why architecture is important. Why does it have an impact? And before I do that, like you talked about, La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. I can imagine when you sort of stepped into it, there was like an embodied feeling that you had,
Absolutely.
and that was intentional. Are incredibly well trained to think of all the senses and space. I think it blows me away how much training they get and how undervalued their work is.
Mm,
Because if you think of, you go into a great architectural space and how you feel, and it is intentionally done that way, and a lot of thought goes into it, and it's a
mm,
very, very difficult to get that. So let's talk about a few things. The impact of design on mental health. So research shows that well-designed spaces can lower stress. It can improve mental health outcomes. If you have natural light, view of green spaces, thoughtful layouts, they can actually reduce anxiety and depression. These are real studies done. And so it's really important to prioritize these elements that promote mental well-being in buildings and not just in high-end developments. Every building.
mm.
It's our schools or the hospitals or the other institutional facilities that we're in. The next one is around public space and social interaction. Well-designed public spaces, they foster greater social interaction, community cohesion. We've talked about that, like public art, open spaces, parks. And she has data that shows that access to such spaces increases civic engagement by up to 20%. Don't we want that outcome? We do. We want greater civic engagement, and architecture has the power to transform those community outcomes. Okay, how about the cognitive impact of built environments? Goldhagen discusses neuroscience research indicating that people in visually complex, well-organized environments exhibit improved cognitive functioning. So this means that a design of an urban environment directly affects our thinking and decision-making abilities. it's really important to have that. Like, let's think about our schools or our work environments. Don't we want to learn better in our schools, at universities? Don't we want to be innovative in our work environments? Where our productivity, our creativity can be enhanced through thoughtful architecture. We don't think about that, but
We
it
don't.
really makes a difference. The obvious one: environmental and sustainable design. Buildings account for a remarkably large percent of global energy consumption. 40% of our energy consumption is in buildings. 33% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. And so Goldhagen emphasized the importance of rethinking construction practices to align with sustainability goals. And so she shares like Singapore's green roofs, vertical gardens, reducing the heat island effect, improving air quality. And then the last one she brings up is the economic benefits of human-centered design. Obviously, architecture is expensive. It's like another significant portion of cost
Cost
in the
on
bottom
the,
line,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay, well, let's look at the data point. Human-centered design and good architecture can lead to a 15 to 30% increase in the property value and a
wow,
20% increase in productivities for workers in well-designed office spaces. And so an
wow,
investment in better architecture are not just socially and environmentally beneficial, but economically sound as well. And that's completely forgotten.
yeah.
So let me,
That
there's
is,
a bunch of data there.
it's great. No, thanks for sharing all that. Again, I'll share another quick story and tie it to some of these benefits you've highlighted. So the whole family, we went to Toronto, and in a few cities, you can book a local to who volunteers to take you around the city. And so I forget the URL now, but I'll share it because it made for an amazing experience in Toronto with the kids, because the local who showed us around the city told us about the city, the buildings, and introduced me to this healthy building concept, which comes out of Harvard, was an architect. He's an architect who lived in Toronto, amazingly knowledgeable again, made the 2 days that we met up with him to walk through the city, the guided tours of the city. It was phenomenal
That's
because
amazing.
of that.
Yeah.
And he would point out some buildings, and to your point about sort of cognitive impact of the built environment, public space, and social interactions. One of the places he took us to was a place that had been designed for kids,
Mm,
and a building you go in designed for kids, a public space designed for kids and grown adult retirees, boomers as we would call them here. But it had been carefully designed to like great ventilation, natural light all the time, and it was as a function of the design. And he, I believe, claimed it was his favorite space in Toronto because the architect had been critical in the process from what do we want, what goals do we have for this space and this building that we're trying to design. And they made sure the goals set and the design ideas, the human-centered design ideas that the architect had
yeah.
put in the designs were implemented. Because that is another thing that I believe is causing some of the struggle that the industry, the architectural industry is having now. There's this buildability, and I don't know if that's a real word, but there's this, can we build what has been designed? And I
Yeah.
believe we can, but at the altar of cost cutting, some of these things are the first to go, and the architect's vision never truly comes to light.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great example. I love that you had this experience with Sean in Toronto. Yeah, I want to know about that URL. That sounds like I
Yeah,
want to do it at every city that I go to. I'm going to LA in for Thanksgiving, and I have a friend that lives there that's an architect, and we're going to do it one day. We're going to walk the museum mile, and he's
that
going
is
to tell me
amazing.
all about the buildings there. I can't wait. I'm just so looking forward to that.
It will be, if it's anything even remotely close to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
experience we had with Sean.
Yeah.
He made us forget we were walking so much because it
Oh,
was
wow.
such a rich experience,
That's amazing.
and it sort of ties to a couple of the laws we have. I'll share those laws now. And one you pulled up in the show notes for this is the law that states that urban forms shape social interactions. 100% agree. The example with Sean essentially highlights that, because you had kids and their parents and older residents of the city all coming into this one beautiful and well-designed human-centered space. And the interactions and the community building and the quality of life as a result of this urban form, which is the building design, was phenomenal. And our law comes from the work of Gale 2010, who demonstrated how design impacts social life in his book, Cities for People. Have that somewhere. I need to finish it. It's a fantastic book. And the consequence of not putting, I'd say, designers, i.e. architects, in the middle of the design process in cities anymore, we're starting to experience that. The poor urban design and poor building design leads to isolation, reduced cohesion in our communities, and decreased quality of life, because the whole healthy building idea, it comes from us being able to design urban spaces that are just the noise, as you were saying about La Grada Familia, you feel when you are in the space. The design amplifies sound
Mm-hmm.
with making it overwhelming. It is absolutely a thing that
Mm-hmm.
architects design into their work. And noise versus sound, ventilation, natural light, all these design elements that are required to shape social interactions and the lives of people in cities that architects provide, we're losing that. It's kind of mind blowing to me. So there's that law. And then another law that we, as you were talking, that I think pops to mind as well, tying it to the example I gave, the cultural preservation strengthens community identity. We know some cities by the buildings that have been designed. We said this about art as well.
Yeah.
And absolutely, as much as we are no longer giving as much thought to architectural design in our cities, every city is really just looking the same, unfortunately. And the quirks of specific cities that culturally identify the city, we're losing it, and it's coming as a result of some of the design as well. So
Yeah.
I'll pause there, because a few of our laws apply,
Yeah.
absolutely. But
Yeah.
these two felt the most relevant
Yeah.
as we're looking through the show notes.
Those are really good. And it made me think, Shay, like, you described like how design, like we're losing good design. And you and I had this conversation about this building that's going up on the corner of Cesar Chavez and
Yeah.
Red River. It's the entrance to the Rainy Street neighborhood.
Yes.
And it is a, a huge, imposing building that just destroys the invitation to go into this really great,
Cultural.
walkable, cultural
Yeah.
neighborhood. It was just a developer who just wanted to maximize whatever they could do. I just drove past it, going to a friend's house for a birthday, and I was reminded again, like as I went past it, I was like, I got to bring this up on the episode, because this building
Yes.
just is not inviting at all. It makes it feel like, oh, I have this huge structure over me. I don't feel
No,
like walking into this neighborhood like I used to. So yes,
it's
design
so
makes a huge
unfortunate.
difference.
It is so unfortunate. I know exactly what you mean. The space that building is in now used to be um, open space
Yeah,
parking, so maybe
yeah,
not the greatest use. But
yeah,
as you walked up toward Rainy Street,
yeah.
there was the hotel to
Yes,
your right,
yes,
which was a well-designed building.
yes.
But now you don't
Now
see
lost.
that
You don't see
anymore.
it.
You
You
don't
don't.
see that
Yeah,
anymore. And it's
yeah,
so unfortunate. Yeah,
yeah,
I do
yeah,
know what you mean. It's a
yeah.
shame. And
It is.
I guess that pulls us into the future,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we're starting to see that future be built today.
yes.
And
Yes.
Maybe we just don't like it as much, but
Yeah.
I'd love you to share. Yeah.
So this is my sort of the start of what I want to say about the future is that too many of our urban spaces are devoid of soul, and that's a great word,
Yes.
designed with little regard for how people feel or interact with them, which is the feeling that I have when I go past that building. And architecture has become invisible, where it should be deeply felt in everyday experiences. And so
Absolutely.
here are sort of a few points to bring up. So obviously, we need to emphasize human-centered design. It must move beyond aesthetics and efficiency. It must prioritize the well-being of humans. Our buildings and public spaces should foster mental health, social equity, resilience. We should try to change our priorities around sustainability. Right now, we have green certification checklists,
Yeah.
which is not the right approach. And we have to have like a holistic, regenerative approach where the architecture doesn't just reduce harm, but actively contributes to environmental recovery. So you're laughing.
Yes.
I want you to pull a thread because I know you have one right here before I go on.
We've been talking about a space for youth soccer development.
Yeah.
I am absolutely going to work with an architect on the
Yeah.
design of the space
Yeah.
because beyond it being a place for kids to come develop in soccer, it is a space to increase the well-being
Yes.
of the humans that will come into it. So that's why I sort of chuckled. I was like, the universe is absolutely aligned on this one because the point, and I'm glad it's your first point. It's we've lost the soul at the altar of efficiency is how I
Yeah.
will phrase this going
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
So the next one is right in line with that,
Yeah.
the need for integration. So
Yes.
we need interdisciplinary collaboration. Architects need to work with urban planners, environmental scientists, sociologists. They need to help create spaces that cater to these diverse needs, especially in our fast-growing cities. We need to engage our communities in the design process. Architects do this really well. They have charrettes. They have a process for doing it. They're incredibly good at doing this to ensure that the architects can serve those who live there rather than those who just invest in it.
Mm.
You're looking to create this space for indoor soccer, and it's not just about the soccer. It's about the community coming together and wanting to
Absolutely.
participate and everyone feeling that they can. We talked about that in the episode about sports, about how sports is an equalizer, and everyone on the
Exactly.
team that you coach are from all different strata of society. And so if the architect can help create that space where everyone feels welcome, and it's not like this,
Yes.
it feels like this fancy
Exclusive.
space where
No.
I can't go in because I don't have the right shoes on or, what have you.
No.
So I love that you're considering that. That's a great example. I can't wait to talk more about that, Shay. And we should bring it up on an episode. You're like
We should.
of that indoor soccer center.
Yeah.
The last point that I want to bring up is the role of policy and governance in shaping architectural outcomes. Obviously, we have to do this in the context of our political and regulatory environment. So our public policies, they need to incentivize architecture. They need to incentivize integrating that sustainability, that human-centered design. This could include subsidies for green buildings, support for adaptive reuse projects, zoning that encourages mixed-use developments, mixed-use buildings, as we often bring up. So it's really, we have to have the political will to design beautiful things, because that is often the case. It needs political and regulatory will to say we care about these things because the outcomes are good. As the data points that we brought up, the outcomes, good architecture and design, are good for society.
Absolutely. And this, it is no coincidence that some of these points and the requirements going forward tie strongly to the episode and the conversation we had around art in cities.
Yes.
Because beyond the function,
Yes.
the design and just the benefits of human-centered designed buildings and the role of architecture in achieving that is similar to how we've sort of relegated artists in some of the fast-growing cities to the artists who made the cultural fabric of the city what it is. the architects who design the cultural infrastructure in the form of buildings in cities. We've relegated them at a time where we shouldn't, honestly.
Yeah.
And as much as we can start to shape policy to regain what we've lost, I think it's super critical. I'm glad you highlighted governance and policy there as well.
Yeah. So that brings us to our call to action. As always, from this episode, we know that architecture and good design will have a profound impact on our mental well-being, social interaction, environmental resilience. So I ask you, become a champion of architecture and good design to help foster these healthier, more connected communities that we want. Whether it's a new school being built in a community, whether it's the office that you work in that's being renovated, champion good design, find an architect, befriend them, understand the world and the challenges that they face, and be a champion for them in your life.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to respond to my friend Jeff, the architect, with just appreciation for the work he does. That is my response to the call to action. So thanks for that, Reza.
I love it. I love it. Well, Shay, let's jump to mailbag before we close.
Yes.
So yeah, my mailbag this week is my friend Jack, product manager Jack, who recommended the book Welcome to Your World. And we had said on the episode of top five books about cities that if you recommend a book to us, we will give you a book. And so he recommended this book. And so the giveaway, I asked him, what book would you like? And he wanted City, a guidebook for the urban age by P.D. Smith. That was one of your recommendations. And so I'll be giving that to him next week. And the call remains open. If you have books that you want us to read, I really enjoyed this book. I told Jack, wow, what a great book. This inspired this episode. And so well-deserved that he gets that book. And I can't wait for other listeners to share good books for us to read.
Yes. No, thanks, Jack. I've also gotten the book. Haven't got to reading it yet, but I sure will. And yes, anybody who recommends a book to us gets a book. I will take that deal any day, Reza.
Yeah. So as we always say at the end, please rate and review. That's actually a very effective way for other listeners to find us. When you rate it, people see that they're listening. Like and subscribe. Obviously, we want the algorithm to know about us too. And then, as we always ask, share it with someone you love, someone that you care about, that you would enjoy this. If you know an architect in your life, please share it with them. I know a few. I'm going to be sharing this episode with them. A shout out to my brother who works now in the architecture profession, Mimo.
That's awesome.
He runs the business operations for a boutique architecture firm in Mumbai called Studio Mumbai. And I love talking to him about the work that he does because, he's getting to do something that our dad had a love for, and we share this love that we have of our dad's love for architecture. And so I'll be sharing this episode with him and thanking him for, continuing this enjoyment, this tradition that we have for architecture.
That's awesome. And so thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next episode of Future Forward. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.